The room that wasn't there. It had been 3 weeks since Ethan moved into the old Victorian house at the edge of town. A steal for the price, they said, and it seemed perfect, quiet, spacious, and full of character. He was looking for a fresh start after his life had crumbled in the city, and this house was the blank slate he needed. But something wasn't right. It started with small things, objects going missing, lights flickering, and that strange draft that always seemed to come from the upstairs hallway. The house had creaks and groans, but Ethan chalked it up to the age of the building, until he found the door. It appeared one night after he'd come back from his evening jog. He was halfway up the stairs when he saw it, an old wooden door at the end of the hallway, set into the wall where there had been none before. Ethan stopped mid-step, staring at the door in confusion. He'd lived here for 3 weeks, meticulously cleaning and unpacking every corner of the house, and he was certain that door had never been there before. He walked down the hallway, his footsteps slow, the air suddenly colder. The closer he got, the more wrong it felt. The door itself was old, far older than the rest of the house, with peeling paint and rusted hinges. It looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. Curiosity gnawed at him. Ethan reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he touched the cold doorknob. He hesitated, every instinct screaming at him to turn back, to leave it alone. But he couldn't stop himself. With a soft creak, the door swung open. Inside was a small, windowless room. The walls were covered in faded floral wallpaper, and a single light bulb hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly. The room was empty, save for a single chair in the middle of the floor. He stepped inside, his skin crawling with an inexplicable dread. The air was thick, suffocating, and the faint smell of mildew filled his nostrils. The door creaked again, closing slightly behind him, and that's when he noticed something strange. There was no dust in the room. It looked untouched, as though someone had been there recently. A soft sound broke the silence, like the rustle of fabric. Ethan spun around, his heart pounding. The room was empty, just as it had been when he walked in, but the air felt different, heavier. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He took a step back toward the door, but it creaked shut before he could reach it, the soft click of the latch sending a spike of fear through him. His breath caught in his throat. He tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. He was locked in. A low whisper filled the room, faint at first, like the wind brushing against the walls, but it grew louder, more insistent. Ethan's pulse raced, his eyes scanning the room for the source, but there was nothing. The whispers rose in volume, swirling around him like a storm, though the words were indecipherable. His hands fumbled at the door, desperate to get out. The whispers turned into a cacophony, voices overlapping, angry and accusing, pressing in on him from all sides. Then, suddenly, silence. Ethan froze, his back against the door, every muscle tensed, waiting for something to happen. Then he saw it. In the reflection of the light bulb, a shadow stood behind him. His breath hitched. Slowly, against every screaming nerve in his body, he turned around. There was nothing. But the moment he faced the empty room, he felt a presence shift behind him again. His stomach churned with nausea, his body paralyzed with terror. Something was in here with him, something unseen, but undeniably there. A loud bang rattled the walls, followed by another and another, like fists pounding, demanding to be let out. The chair in the middle of the room slid an inch across the floor on its own. Ethan's eyes widened in horror. Then came the scratching. Faint at first, then more frantic. It sounded like nails raking against the walls, coming from every direction. He backed up against the door, eyes darting around, feeling the walls closing in on him. The whispers returned, louder this time, clearer. And in that moment, he understood the words. "You shouldn't have opened it." The light bulb flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. Ethan's hand shook as he tried the door again, praying it would open. But the handle remained stubbornly locked. The chair slid further, scraping loudly across the floor. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. He threw his weight against the door, but it was no use. The scratching grew more violent, the whispers more insistent, the room closing in around him. Suddenly, the door burst open, and Ethan stumbled backward into the hallway, gasping for breath. He slammed the door shut behind him, his hands trembling. The noises stopped, leaving him in a suffocating silence. Panting, Ethan stared at the door, his mind racing to make sense of what had just happened. His skin crawled with the sensation of being watched. Slowly, he backed away from the door, never taking his eyes off it. The hallway felt colder now, darker, as if the house itself had shifted. The door stood there, silent and still, but Ethan knew it wasn't over.